They say I'm controversial. They say that I'm bold, but I wasn't nothing like Jack Johnson.
Listen, in 1908, you got lynched for looking at white women, reckless eyeballing. He married 3 of them.
Wow.
I don't put myself in the league of Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson's fighting in the ring, and there's 75,000 people saying, I'm gonna kill you if you hurt him.
Reno, Nevada, July 4th, 1910. 20,000 hearts beat under the scorching desert sun. White America has found its champion. Jim Jeffries, the great white hope, summoned from retirement for one purpose: to put a black man in his place. And what a better way to do it than America's founding day. But Jack Johnson's smile says what words cannot. The heavyweight champion of the world fears no man, and today, he'll prove it. 2 men, 1 ring, a nation holding its breath. In the dying days of the 19th century, on the bustling docks of Galveston, Texas, a legend was born. Jack Johnson's story didn't begin in a boxing ring, but in the humble home of 2 former slaves. The year was 1878, and America was still nursing the deep wounds of the Civil War. Young Jack learned his first lessons in survival on those very docks where his father toiled. The sea air carried not just the salt of the Gulf, but the promise of something greater. As a teenager, his hands grew callous not from throwing punches, but from the back-breaking work of loading cotton bales and dodging the ever-present rats that plagued the waterfront. But fate had different plans for him. In the shadowy back rooms and makeshift arenas of Galveston, Johnson discovered the brutal world of the battle royale, a barbaric spectacle where white spectators would throw multiple black fighters into a ring, betting on who would be the last man standing. It was a cruel reminder of the world he lived in, but for Johnson, it became his first stepping stone to greatness. What set Johnson apart wasn't just his raw power, it was his mind. While others saw boxing as mere brawling, he transformed it into an art. He developed a defensive style so sophisticated that frustrated opponents often found themselves hitting nothing but air. His footwork was like a dancer's, his jab precise as a surgeon's scalpel. In an era when black fighters were expected to be crude sluggers, Johnson defied every stereotype.
He was bad back in 1909, man. Man, you know, Jack Johnson was the greatest. He had to be the greatest of all.
The young fighter from Galveston wasn't just fighting for titles, he was fighting for recognition in a world that refused to see him as an equal. Every punch he threw carried the weight of the struggles of Black America. Every victory, a blow against the racism and hatred so prevalent at the time. But the real battle, the one that would shake America to its core, was still to come. By the way, if you like the content you see on this channel, leave a like and subscribe. It helps us spread awareness about the untold stories of Black history that deserve to be told. In the early 1900s, the heavyweight championship was more than a sporting title. It was a symbol of racial superiority. White champions had long hidden behind the color line, an unwritten rule that prevented black fighters from competing for the heavyweight crown. This wasn't mere discrimination. It was fear, wrapped in the belief that a black champion would shatter the myth of white supremacy. The color line in boxing mirrored the harsh realities of Jim Crow America. Black fighters could battle each other, but challenging a white champion was forbidden. The heavyweight title, with its implications of physical dominance, stood as a powerful symbol of white superiority. To maintain this illusion, champions before Burns had simply refused to face black challengers, claiming it would spark racial unrest. But Jack Johnson refused to accept these barriers. When Tommy Burns claimed the heavyweight crown in 1906, Johnson began a relentless pursuit that would take him across the globe. From London to Paris, from Vancouver to Sydney, Johnson shadowed Burns at every turn. At boxing matches, he would stand up and challenge Burns publicly. Finally, in Sydney, Australian promoter Hugh McIntosh made Burns an offer he couldn't refuse: $30,000, the largest purse in boxing history at that time. Still, Burns demanded even more concessions, a bigger share of the purse than the challenger, and approval of the referee. Johnson accepted every demand, knowing this was his chance to shatter the color line forever. The fight itself revealed why so many had feared Johnson's challenge. He dominated Burns completely, his superior height, reach, and skill making the champion look helpless. Between punches, Johnson taunted Burns, asking him, "Poor Tommy, who taught you to fight like that?" The police stopped the fight in the 14th round, but the point had been made. The color line was broken. Johnson's victory sent shockwaves through the boxing world and beyond. Writer Jack London voiced the sentiment of white America when he called for Jim Jeffries to emerge from his alfalfa farm and remove that golden smile from Jack Johnson's face. The search for a great white hope had begun, but Johnson wasn't finished smiling, not by a long shot. But Johnson's reign as champion wasn't just about boxing. It was about how he lived his life outside the ring, a life that deliberately challenged the racial codes of Jim Crow America. While white America searched for a champion to defeat him, Johnson sparked even greater outrage with his personal life. He openly dated white women, most notably Belle Schreiber, a former prostitute from Milwaukee. The newspapers of the day were merciless. The Chicago Tribune branded him a defiler of white womanhood. The New York Times consistently referred to his relationships as scandalous and offensive to white sensibilities. But it was his relationship with Etta Duryea, a Brooklyn socialite, that caused the greatest uproar. When they married in 1910, headlines across America screamed in protest. The Pittsburgh Gazette wrote, "Johnson's marriage to white woman, complete defiance of racial barriers." In major cities, white citizens held protests denouncing Johnson's lifestyle. In Norfolk, Virginia, a group of ministers petitioned Congress to ban interracial marriages nationwide. In Atlanta, religious leaders called for boycotts of Johnson's fights. The champion's response was typically defiant. He bought faster cars, wore more expensive suits, and smiled that gold-toothed smile even broader. The racial tension exploded after each of Johnson's victories. When he defeated Stanley Ketchel in 1909, riots broke out in New York and Philadelphia. White mobs attacked black neighborhoods, burning homes and businesses. In Houston, 3 black men were killed for celebrating Johnson's victory too publicly. In New Orleans, police had to break up crowds of white men hunting for black citizens who dared to show pride in Johnson's success. Yet Johnson refused to play the role of the humble black champion. He drove purple cars, wore elegant suits, and frequented Chicago's finest restaurants, often with a white woman on his arm. When refused service, he would simply buy the establishment. The Chicago Defender reported that he once purchased an entire restaurant just to be served a cup of coffee. This was the atmosphere in which Jim Jeffries emerged from retirement. The former champion was fighting to restore what many white Americans saw as the natural order. Newspapers painted Jeffries as a savior. As fight day approached, the tension reached a fever pitch. Special trains arrived in Reno packed with spectators, many carrying signs reading "Save the White Race" and "Kill the Golden Smile." Johnson, meanwhile, continued to smile, driving around Reno in his flashy car with his white wife, seemingly oblivious to the hatred swirling around him. And while we want to show pictures of this, unfortunately, most of the newspapers or pictures of that time have been heavily censored. Just another part of an effort to hide and erase Jack Johnson's incredible black legacy. On July 4th, 1910, as America celebrated its independence, an arena in Reno, Nevada became the epicenter of a nation's racial divide. 20,000 souls gathered in the desert heat, not just to witness a fight, but what many believed would be a battle for racial supremacy. Out of those 20,000 spectators, only a few hundred were African American. The rest had come with a single purpose: to see Johnson fall. Jim Jeffries, the great white hope, entered to thunderous applause. After 5 years of retirement, the former champion had shed nearly 100 pounds for this moment. He carried with him the desperate hopes of white America, a burden as heavy as any title belt. In Johnson's corner, he remained relaxed, even playful. When photographers approached, he posed with that same maddening smile that had become his trademark. It was more than confidence. It was defiance wrapped in joy. As the opening bell echoed across the desert air, Jeffries, the betting favorite, came forward. But Johnson, moving with the grace of a dancer, slipped away from Jeffries' crushing blows like a man who had all the time in the world. Between exchanges, Johnson's psychological warfare proved as potent as his fists. He talked constantly to Jeffries, smiling, laughing, asking the mighty great white hope how it felt to be in the ring with a black man who wasn't afraid. The crowd grew increasingly restless as the early rounds passed. Their champion, their hope, couldn't seem to lay a glove on Johnson. The smile never left Johnson's face. As the brutal Nevada sun beat down, these two men circled each other in the center of the ring. But they fought for more than just a title. They fought for pride, for race, for history itself. What happened next would shake America to its core. At the end of the fight, Johnson was declared victor. When the fight ended, America erupted. Cities burned. In dozens of communities across the nation, white mobs attacked black neighborhoods. From Houston to New York, from Little Rock to Los Angeles, the violence claimed lives simply because a black man had proven himself better in the ring. These weren't just riots. They were a desperate backlash against what Johnson represented: defiance. They couldn't beat Johnson in the ring, so they found another way. In 1912, they charged him under the Mann Act, a law meant to prevent human trafficking, twisted into a tool of racial persecution. His crime? Traveling with his white girlfriend across state lines. When their first attempt to prosecute Johnson for his relationship with Lucille Cameron failed, they dug deeper into his past. They found Belle Schreiber and convinced her to testify against him. In May 1913, it took an all-white jury less than 2 hours to convict Johnson of transporting Belle Schreiber across state lines for immoral purposes. The judge, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, a man who would later become baseball's first commissioner and maintain its racial segregation, sentenced Johnson to 1 year and a day in prison. Rather than submit, Johnson fled. With his new wife, Lucille Cameron, he escaped into exile. For 7 years, he lived as a fugitive, fighting matches across Europe, Mexico, and Cuba. The heavyweight champion of the world became a wanted man for the crime of living life on his terms. In 1920, Johnson finally returned, surrendering at the Mexican border. He served his year at Leavenworth Prison, but his boxing career was over. Yet even behind bars, Johnson never apologized for who he was. He died as he lived, defiant to the end. But the impact of Jack Johnson reached far beyond the ring. He became a symbol for the civil rights movement, a testament to refusing to accept the limitations others placed on you. Every black athlete who followed, from Joe Louis to Muhammad Ali,
he had to be a courageous man, so I just admire him for more so than his boxing ability.
From Jackie Robinson to Colin Kaepernick, walked a path that Johnson first carved through the wilderness of American racism. In 2018, more than a century after those charges and 72 years after his death, President Donald Trump granted Johnson a posthumous pardon, acknowledging what many had known all along, that Johnson's only real crime was being an unapologetically free black man in an America that wasn't ready for one. But his real legacy isn't in official pardons or posthumous honors. It lives in his example, that one man's refusal to bend, to break, or to apologize for his excellence could help pave the way for generations to come. Jack Johnson never saw the world he helped create, a world where black athletes would become champions, icons, and leaders. But every time he stepped into that ring with that unforgettable smile, he was fighting for more than just a title. He was fighting for the right to be himself, unashamedly, and without compromise. In the end, that might have been his greatest victory of all. If you enjoyed Jack Johnson and his legendary story, you might also enjoy our video on the Black Seminoles and their crazy history. Click here to watch.